Hi, class. So today we're going to be doing a little bit of a review since we came back from break. So today we're going to be talking more about the social impact of the Industrial Revolution. So, what were the social effects of the Industrial Revolution, or in other words, how is society changed because of this? So, what were the causes of urbanization and what was life like in these new industrial cities? So, we're going to compare and contrast the industrial working class and the new middle class. We're hopefully going to be able to understand how factory systems and mines changed the way people worked and what kinds of people worked. And then we'll analyze the benefits and challenges of industrialization. So, when we look at first people moving to new industrial cities, I mean, there's a bunch of factors that come together. One is because these small farmers are getting forced off their lands. They're going to go to where the money and the jobs are, and that's where factories are in the cities. And so, even though some of these factors may have been in really small villages, some of these factories to begin with, eventually these small villages are going to grow into industrial towns and become cities eventually. On top of that, you have population growth. And, if most of your people live in or near cities, then your cities are going to have the biggest population growth, right? We also have, as you know, farming improved greatly as a result of the agricultural revolution, these new machinery, new technology. Farmers were able to produce more than before. And so, with more food comes more population. So, population grows. And then you also know not only are farmers getting pushed off the land, but these cities are pulling people to them because they need more workers. And so it's a push-pull relationship. If you remember what we talked about before we went on break, it's push-pull relationship in a lot of ways. So if we look at the new social classes that are emerging, the industrial middle class, they get labeled as the bourgeoisie. There's a whole variety of people who go into this new middle class, the bourgeoisie. So they weren't traditionally part of the landed aristocracy. They were not the landowners, right? These are people who work their way up into the middle class. So they're the merchants and inventors and investors and skilled artisans, people like that. They just have access to either maybe some money or skills or knowledge and ideas that other people don't, and it helps give them a step up. So if you look at this middle class family life, it's pretty luxurious. They have nice homes, it's well furnished, they're not really obscenely rich, but they have more than enough money and time to be able to spend it on the better things in life, the luxuries of life. So they have a higher standard of living than some of the other groups that we will talk about. Now, the other social class is the industrial working class. For them, this is a pretty rough life. It's very crowded living. It's dirty. There's lots of disease. You're living in cramped, enclosed conditions. You're living in places where your drinking water is contaminated by sewage. And this is all going to lead to lots of illness and sickness. And so it just doesn't take very long for some of these things to spread. And so it's kind of a miserable existence for them. So you have new social classes emerging. So these workers try and figure out new ways to be able to get through this new situation they find themselves in. So there's this push for something called labor unions. And basically, these are where workers can come together, they can use their numbers to use their influence and power to negotiate with the factory owners, to negotiate with them what it is that they need or want, maybe better pay, right, or safer working conditions. That's what labor unions do. The other thing that's kind of interesting during this time, at least, is the Luddites. Luddites. It's the word right here, Luddites. Luddites. They are an early prime example of what a labor union is. And here is actually an image, a picture of the Luddites. And you might be thinking that they're working here, but they're really not. They're actually destroying a machine. So the Luddites, these were maybe lower skilled workers, and had been displaced by factory machines. So they had lost their jobs because of industrialization. And so the Luddites operated in kind of a triangle in the central part of Great Britain, where they would go in and they would literally destroy some of the machines at night, in the middle of the night, or try and burn down the factories. So really they're vandalizing the machines, trying to destroy these new factories, because the factories and the machines were essentially responsible for costing them their jobs. Now, the other thing that kind of happens, another way in which the working class, respond to industrialization is there's a change in religion, and there's a development of this new form of Christianity called Methodism. And it's an idea that gets started about the same time that these industrial cities are growing. And so when you have these people who have rough lives, and many of them maybe have left the rural areas and farming and come to the cities, and they left behind their old parishes, and they're looking for some spirituality. And these two things just kind of meet at the same time. So in a lot of ways, Methodism and industrialization and this new working labor class, they kind of grow together in some ways. And so this does a little bit more in terms of explaining Methodism. I have this definition here. And if you really want to know, you can read the book as well in the chapter. But the message really appeals to the working class. Methodism was a religious movement founded by a man named John Wesley. And the important thing to remember about the Methodists is that Methodists, who tended to be, like I said, members of the working class, they tried to focus on the better life to come, the life that they would have in heaven after they passed away, rather than focusing on their lives here on earth. Essentially, it was a way in which working class people used religion to try to cope with the struggles and issues that they were facing during this time of industrialization. So they were more concerned about what was to come in the next life than focusing on the issues and problems of the current life, right? So that's Methodism. So life in factories and mines. When we look at how does it change the way people work, there were harsh conditions, long work hours. You go from having a mixture of things before industrialization, maybe when you're working on the farm before industrialization, one day you might be harvesting, one day you might be planting, or at least one season you're doing one or the other. One day you might be fixing a fence, one day you might be pulling weeds, and it's kind of an ever-changing thing based on the needs and the weather, right? But when you get to the factory during industrialization, it's the same every day. The whistle blows, you work 12 to 16 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week, and then the whistle blows and you go home. And the next day and the next week and the next month and years and years and years and years and years, and that's your life. That's what you do every day. If you get sick, you get hurt, you lose your job. That's what the conditions were. Early on, you see large numbers of women going into the factories. At first, men had had other opportunities for work, I guess, and women didn't. So that's what enabled women to kind of go into factory work as well. And sooner or later, they're going to also be replaced by men. But you will see during World War I, this will change and shift. World War II as well. Industrialization, it did open up new opportunities for women in factories and working outside of the home. Miners probably by far have the worst conditions. So they're the most dangerous conditions, both short-term and long-term, because you can have an explosion. You can have poisonous gas. You can have a cave-in. All those things are a day-to-day reality for miners. But also, working in dark mines with dust and all that type of stuff and pollution. Because of this, miners have a pretty short life expectancies. Children also have dangerous jobs. They have probably the most dangerous jobs in some cases. Really, by the age of 7 or 8, they're already working. Part of the reason why they're working is that these industrial working families need those extra wages. As small as they might be, they needed them to survive. Sooner or later, you do get some factory acts where the government's, trying to limit the number of hours that children can work and the ages at which they can work, but that's pretty tough to enforce. It takes a long time before any real substantial changes happen. And you can see the impact of young working people here in this chart on the top left. How many people had started, before really the age of 14 or 17. If you add these numbers up, you got 50% here. So if you look at these numbers, this says that just under 50% started under the age of 10. You've got nearly 28% of people started between the ages of 10 and 13. So now if you add those up, we're already up to 78% between the ages. And then you see between the ages of 14 and 17, you've got another 10. So we're almost at 88%. So clearly the vast majority of people who are working in the cotton industries, the cotton factories, had started before the age of 17. Right? So if we look at the results of industrialization, there are blessings and curses. It's kind of hard to really weigh this out, especially at the time. If you were a working class individual and you're looking at the blessings and the curses, to you, the curses definitely outweigh the blessings. Now, if you fast forward to present time, our time, the blessings probably outweigh the curses. And really, that's because we're the beneficiaries of these people who had to suffer these horrible conditions as they were barely scraping by subsistence conditions. They had a harsh working environment and they just struggled in the day-to-day survival. But because of their hard work and their hardships, we're enjoying the benefits of industrialization today. So it's really all about perspective, right? So now we're going to talk more about the new ways of thinking that came about during this time. We've talked about this before, but we're going to review it. That way it's in our minds for the final. So what new ideas about economics and society were fostered as a result of the Industrial Revolution? Again, we need to understand laissez-faire economics and the beliefs of those who supported it. We should be able to describe the doctrine of utilitarianism, the theories of socialism, and Karl Marx's views on the working class and the response to Marxism. So to start again, laissez-faire economics is hands-off, meaning that there shouldn't be any interference from anyone. The government should not interfere in the economy or society and should just let people be. That this invisible hand of economics should work freely, right? And so again, this comes from Adam Smith. We talked about him during the Enlightenment, and it comes from his book, Wealth of Nations, and it advocates for a free market where there isn't any interference from government or any other individuals. And according to Adam Smith, this was good for everyone, from the top social class to the bottom social class, because what you would get is you get the right amount of product at just the right price, and you'd have the perfect number of workers getting the perfect wages if all things were to work freely. So those people who believed in laissez-faire economics, you've also got Thomas Malthus, who is first, and then we'll talk about Ricardo second. But Malthus holds a bleak view that the population is going to grow faster than our resources. And at some point, there is going to need to be war, disease, or famine to keep the population from getting too high. So in other words, once the population outstripped or outpaced resources and food production, people would either starve to death, or there'd be a war over resources, or people would get sick and die. One of the things that happened over time is that Malthus was proved wrong. And there's a number of reasons for that. One of the things that he didn't really account for is the ability of technology to figure out new and better ways to produce food. But not only that, how to transport it, how to transport food. So it could get from places where they had plenty of food to places that didn't. And so this never really, his idea of population theory never really came to be. Ricardo shares this negative view, but one of the things that he said is that wage increases would only go up enough to cover the cost of necessities. So no matter how productive people got, they would never make more money than just barely enough to pay for necessities. And so Malthus and Ricardo both believed that government should remain hands off because they thought these things would work themselves out naturally. And, maybe it wouldn't always be for the best, but that people needed to learn how to work hard and overcome these adversities and not have government interference. So utilitarians argue for a limited government. So they don't quite buy into this unregulated, laissez-faire free market. They do believe that the government has a role. And when we talk about utilitarianism, according to utilitarians like Jeremy Bentham, who was the philosopher who created this idea, the goal for society and the role of government is to provide the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. And so any kind of laws or actions need to be weighed in terms of Do they provide more happiness or do they provide more pain and unhappiness? And then, based on these decisions, you need to make decisions that allow for the most happiness possible. And so, according to John Stuart Mill, who is another philosopher who was an advocate for this theory, the government, according to him, is there to prevent harm to others. And that's the role and job of the government. And so you don't just have this laissez-faire government. You need to have a more hands-on government, meaning that they need to be more involved. And then from this, next comes socialism. And so socialism is this concept that people as a group own and operate the means of production so that you eliminate class differences, but also that you can provide for the most happiness for the most number of people. And so sometimes they're referred to as utopians, that they're going to create this perfect little utopian society where all working property is shared. The means of production, meaning the factories and railroads, machinery, tools, businesses, and raw materials that are used to make goods are all owned by society as a whole. And so Robert Owen is a mill owner who tries this idea out. He creates a community in Europe and also a community in Harmony, Indiana. And he's a little bit different compared to other mill owners at this time because he really does try to consider the needs and the wants and the happiness of his workers. And so he's going to build the society where work and property are shared. And it was meant to be a less stressful environment. He refused to use child labor, for example. And he even campaigned for laws that limited child labor and encouraged the organization and creation of labor unions. And so if we look at Karl Marx next, in his Communist Manifesto, he highlights his views of the world. He wrote that there's going to be a constant struggle between classes. The working class, according to him, is going to struggle against the owner class. The working class is the proletariat, right? And the owner class is the bourgeoisie. And what he foresees is an extreme view, I guess, of socialism, where there's going to be a classless society. There's going to be community ownership of all property and means of production. So basically, everyone's going to belong to one class of people and will all own the means of production. And so according to Marx, history is the struggle between the haves and the have-nots. In this example, the have-nots are the proletariat, the working class. And according to Karl Marx, capitalism is kind of the root of all evil because capitalism helps those on top to stay on top, and those who have more get more, and those who have less end up getting less. And so one of the things that he believed was going to happen was an international workers' struggle, meaning that all the workers in the world would unite to overthrow the bourgeoisie, to overthrow the haves. And what you see over time is, for brief periods, Marxism kind of flourishes. Germany comes up with a hybrid version of Marxism called social democracy. You really see the Russian Revolution in the 1900s, which you will learn about next semester, and other countries out in the world where they flirt with Marxism a little bit. Now, when you look at communism, really the last remaining communist nation today is Cuba, and that's probably going to change, I would imagine, pretty radically now that, other countries, including the United States, has opened up a bit to trade with them. And what's also going to happen is Marxism, as you'll see in next semester as well, it grows, it flourishes, but it also starts to lose its appeal, and it's even lost its appeal today. Because rather than having this worldwide worker revolution that Karl Marx envisioned, nationalism proves to be a far stronger power than classism. People identify more with their country than they do with their class, right? They're more patriotic. They have a love for their country. And that nationalism is more important to people than their class status. And so people were more loyal to their country than they were to their social class. And he didn't really account for this. And so Marxism kind of dies out for that reason. And the other thing that happens is communism never really was practiced the way that Karl Marx preached it. It was always forced by a handful of totalitarian rulers. And so it was never really allowed to exist in an organic manner, right? A lot of times it wasn't like everyone asked for it, right? And it was this peaceful transition from capitalism to communism. It was always done forcibly by violence and through, it was being forced down upon by these totalitarian groups. So it never really was achieved in the way that Marx wanted it. And so it just never really worked out. And the other thing is that the free market, or at least a limited free market, maybe one that the utilitarians advocated for with some government involvement, has always been more successful than communism for a variety of different reasons. So, if you look at the present day, through the early 1900s to about 1980s, 1990s, there was that 80-year period or 60-year period where people were flirting with Marxism a little bit. But in the present time, it really has kind of lost its appeal. So let me know if you have any questions from this lesson. I'll make sure to try to help you out, okay?